The Dragonborn dynasty was feared across the stars, their empire stretching over hundreds of worlds, their fleets blackening the skies of any who resisted them. They were called dragons not just because of their power, but because their rulers were born with wings of living fire, bones infused with molten strength, and blood said to burn brighter than the suns they ruled. Every child of that line grew to command both armies and fear, their strength unquestioned, their legacy unmatched. Yet in the towering citadel of Drakkar Prime, where the walls pulsed with the heartbeats of captured stars, one prince sat alone in shadows, broken before his life had even truly begun. The boy was called Kalen, heir by blood but not by strength. His wings were withered, twisted bones pressing against his back like cruel reminders of what he would never become. He could not summon fire. He could not fight like the others of his line. Where other princes thundered across battlefields, he limped through the marble halls of the court, eyes lowered, hearing the whispers. The crippled prince, they called him when they thought he could not hear. A shadow in a family of flames. The Dragonborn were proud, merciless beings, and mercy had no place in their court. Kalen had grown used to silence, to being invisible, to feeling the cold stares of his own kin pass over him, as though he were a stain that could not be washed away. Even the servants, aliens stolen from conquered worlds, looked at him with a mix of pity and contempt. Except for one. She was human, young, plain, small in the eyes of dragons, but she did not look away. Her name was Alara, assigned as nothing more than a maid, cleaning the chambers no other servant wanted. But when she passed the forgotten prince, she would bow her head differently, not with duty, but with something else. Respect. At first, Kalen thought it a trick. He had learned that kindness in the Empire was as false as a dagger coated in honey. But Alara did not mock him. She did not flinch when he stumbled. She dared to speak to him, to ask questions others never would. "Do you feel pain?" she once asked softly as she folded the heavy robes across his bed. He almost laughed at the boldness. No one cared if he felt pain. Yet when he answered, "Every day," she did not look disgusted. She looked angry, as though the cruelty of his own family had cut her instead. Something stirred in the prince then, though he did not yet understand it. But the court noticed. Whispers changed shape. The crippled boy speaks to a servant. The human grows too close. In a place where bloodlines were guarded more fiercely than galaxies, such a bond was dangerous. Alara should have been afraid, should have stepped back. But she did not. She saw in Kalen something none of his own kind could see, a spark that flickered, fragile but real, buried beneath shame and silence. One night, that spark was tested. The palace was silent, its towers bathed in the glow of distant nebulae. Kalen sat in his chambers, staring at the broken curve of his wings in the mirror, hating them, hating himself. That was when the shadows moved. Assassins, cloaked in dark armor, slipped through the silence like poison. They carried blades laced with venom strong enough to fell a dragonlord, and their orders were whispered and clear. End the boy, erase the weakness from the royal bloodline. Kalen barely had time to stand when the first blade cut the air. His body moved slow, too slow, crippled muscles screaming in protest. He would die there, and no one would mourn. But then another figure moved in the dark. Alara. She had come with a tray of food, nothing more. Yet in an instant she became a shield. Without thinking, she hurled the tray into the face of the first assassin, the crash of metal startling the silence. Her hands grabbed a ceremonial spear from the wall, a weapon she had no right to touch, no training to wield. But desperation is its own kind of strength. The assassins laughed at her, their voices cold, mocking. A human dares. One spat, circling. Alara's arms trembled, but her eyes did not. She planted herself between them and the prince, a fragile wall that should have shattered. Yet something about her stance froze Kalen's breath. She was not just a maid now. She was something else, something impossible. Steel met steel in a clash that echoed through the chamber. Alara fought clumsy, wild, but with a fury that forced the assassins back a step. Kalen watched, heart pounding, as blood splattered the marble. She was human, weak, breakable, and yet she did not break. She dared what no one in the entire empire had ever dared. She fought not for herself, but for him. In that moment, Kalen felt the fire stir in his chest, faint but undeniable. He stumbled forward, grabbing a fallen blade with shaking hands. The assassins turned, mocking him now. But the crippled prince did not care. For the first time in his life, he raised a weapon not to defend his honor, but to defend the one who believed in him. The chamber filled with the sound of struggle, the clash of hopeless defiance against trained killers. And in that desperate night, as shadows and sparks danced across the cold walls, something shifted. The empire had always whispered of the crippled prince who could not rise. But in secret, unseen by the court, the first ember of a dragon began to glow. The palace did not sleep after the assassins' blades had been broken. Guards stormed through the chambers. Shadows burned away by the light of torches and the hiss of plasma rifles. Yet when they arrived, they found no royal protector, no elite dragon warrior who had defended the prince. They found only a human maid trembling with blood on her hands and the crippled heir clutching a weapon he could barely lift. The assassins' bodies lay crumpled against the walls, their armor pierced, their mission failed. No one spoke it aloud, but every guard who entered the chamber thought the same. This should have been impossible. Kalen sat in silence as the bodies were dragged away. He could still feel the weight of the blade in his hands, the tremor of fire that had tried to awaken within him. It had been faint, fragile, like an ember fighting to breathe, but it had been real. For the first time, he wondered if he had been wrong all along, that perhaps he was not entirely broken. His gaze shifted to Alara, who stood with her head bowed, her arms streaked with cuts she had not even noticed. She had defied assassins, had stood between him and certain death. Why? She was only a maid, only human, and yet she had dared what no dragon had ever dared. Later, when the chambers were silent again, Kalen spoke to her. His voice was low, hesitant, but sharp with curiosity. "Why did you not run?" he asked. Alara lifted her eyes slowly. They were not the eyes of a servant speaking to her master. They were steady, fearless. "Because no one else would stand for you. And you needed someone." The words struck deeper than any blade. For all his life, Kalen had been told he was unworthy, unwanted, useless. But this fragile human maid looked at him as though he was worth fighting for. From that night forward, something unspoken bound them together. Alara began to linger in his chambers longer than her duties required. She watched the way he moved, the stiffness of his crippled wings, the way his body faltered when he tried to lift even simple weights. And then one night, she did something reckless. She told him she could teach him a different way, the human way of fighting. At first Kalen laughed bitterly. "What can a human teach a dragon?" he asked. She did not flinch. "Not how to be a dragon, but how to survive when you are not one." Her voice carried no doubt, no fear. She had seen soldiers fight in places dragons had never dared to tread. She knew how humans turned weakness into strength, how they adapted, how they endured. And now, she would teach him. Their training began in secret, hidden away in the abandoned gardens beneath the palace walls. Kalen was awkward, his body betraying him with every movement. His wings dragged against the ground, his balance collapsed under the weight of his twisted bones. Yet Alara did not mock him. She corrected his stance, guided his hands, taught him how to use his smaller frame not as a burden but as an advantage. Where dragons relied on brute force, she showed him speed. Where dragons crushed with power, she showed him precision. She taught him to fight not like a warrior born of fire, but like a survivor who refused to die. Days turned into weeks. Kalen began to change. His body, though still marked by weakness, grew sharper, faster. He learned to anticipate strikes, to parry with agility instead of strength. For the first time in his life, he felt control, felt his heart burn with something other than shame. Alara's presence became more than guidance, it became fuel. She pushed him harder than any court tutor ever had, but she also believed in him when no one else had dared. And belief, Kalen discovered, was more powerful than fire. Yet shadows still whispered in the palace. Rumors grew that the crippled prince was different, that he had begun to train in secret. And where rumors stirred, spies followed. One evening, as Kaelin and Alara sparred beneath the moonlight filtering through shattered glass, a pair of eyes watched from the darkness. A royal counselor, loyal not to the prince but to the strength of the dynasty, had discovered their secret. His gaze lingered not just on the prince's movements, but on the maid's bold defiance. A human daring to train a dragon. Such defiance was not simply forbidden, it was treason. Unaware, Kaelin struck his first clean blow against Alara's guard, knocking the wooden blade from her hands. For the first time, he felt the surge of triumph bloom in his chest. He had beaten her, even for a moment. Alara smiled, blood on her lip, pride in her eyes. "You see," she whispered. "You are not broken. You are only untrained." Kaelin's breath caught in his throat. For the first time in his life, he believed it. But in the shadows, the counselor turned and slipped away, his mind already racing with plans. The court would not allow this bond to grow. A crippled prince finding strength was dangerous enough. A human maid daring to teach him, that was heresy. There would be punishment. There would be blood. And soon, the secret garden would no longer be a place of hope, but the stage of betrayal. The whispers of the palace spread faster than light. Servants carried them in hushed voices, guards traded them behind their helmets, and even the nobles began to murmur at the edges of their feasts. The crippled prince, long thought useless, had begun to change. No one could explain it. Some claimed they saw him moving through the halls with a steadier stride, his eyes burning with something sharper than shame. Others swore that when he passed, the torches flickered as if pulled by a hidden current of heat. The court did not believe in miracles, but fear was often born from what they could not explain. Kaelin felt it too. The training with Alara had begun to carve something new inside him. His body was still broken, but his movements carried purpose now. The shame that had once bent his shoulders began to lift, replaced by a strange fire he could not name. In the hidden gardens, when Alara struck with her wooden blade, Kaelin could meet her blow without stumbling. When she whispered again, he found himself ready, hungry to try once more. But it was not only skill that grew, it was something deeper, a stirring inside his blood, as though ancient echoes were waking, answering the defiance that Alara had breathed into him. It happened first during a sparring match. Alara lunged, her strike swift and true, aimed at his shoulder. Kaelin raised his blade, but too late. The wood should have cracked against his skin. Instead, a flash of heat burst from his chest, a ripple of fire that hissed into the air and scorched the weapon in her hands. Alara dropped it with a cry, staring wide-eyed as the wood smoked. Kaelin froze, his own palms tingling, the faint glow of ember crawling across his veins before fading. They looked at each other in silence, and Kaelin whispered what both were thinking, "It's awakening." For generations, the dragon-born bloodline had been defined by its fire. The crippled prince had never shown a spark, not even as a child. But now, beneath the guidance of a human maid, the flame had stirred. Alara stepped closer, her voice trembling but fierce. "This is only the beginning. You are not broken, Kaelin. You are waiting." News of his progress reached the council quickly, for the spy who had watched their secret training wasted no time. The chamber of elders filled with voices sharp as blades. Some argued the prince's awakening was a lie, a trick to cover his shame. Others feared what it might mean if true. A crippled heir rising from ashes would shift power in dangerous ways. Enemies within the dynasty might be forced aside. Bloodlines carefully balanced could collapse. And worst of all, a human maid's hand was guiding it. Such disgrace could not be tolerated. But the emperor, Kaelin's father, did not dismiss it so easily. A test was arranged, a public duel in the court arena, before the eyes of nobles and generals. If the prince had truly found strength, it would be seen. If not, his humiliation would be final, undeniable. For Kaelin, the announcement felt like a sentence, but Alara's gaze did not waver. "This is your chance," she told him. "They think you will fall. Show them that you can rise." The day of the duel came with banners draped across the high walls of the arena. Thousands filled the seats, their voices echoing like storms. The air was thick with expectation, the smell of molten stone, and the sharp hunger of a crowd ready to see weakness crushed. Kalen stood in the center, his withered wings folded tight, his heart a hammer in his chest. Across from him, a young warrior stepped forward, strong and cruel, eager to carve his name into the spectacle of shame. The fight began. The warrior lunged, blade flashing, and Kalen barely managed to parry. The crowd roared with laughter. Again the warrior struck, harder this time, driving Kalen back step by step. Ilara's voice echoed in his mind. Precision, not power. Speed, not strength. He shifted, let the strike slide past, and countered. His blade connected, a shallow cut, but the first mark he had ever left on another in combat. Gasps replaced laughter. The duel stretched on. Kalen bled, stumbled, nearly fell, but he did not surrender. Each time, he rose again. And then, when the warrior drove forward with a final crushing blow, something deep inside Kalen broke free. Fire burst from his chest, not a spark this time, but a stream of flame that arced across the arena and forced the warrior sprawling to the ground. Silence fell, every eye locked on the crippled prince who stood surrounded by smoke, his hands trembling with the glow of dragon fire. The council could not hide their shock. Whispers spread like wildfire. He has the fire. The broken prince breathes flame. Kalen stood taller than he ever had before, though inside, fear still twisted with triumph. He did not fully understand what he had awakened, only that it was real. And the court had seen it. That night, Ilara met him in secret once more. Her face was pale with both pride and worry. "They will fear you now," she said softly. "Fear is power, but it also paints a target on your back. You must be ready for what comes." Kalen nodded, though his heart was heavy. He knew the assassins would come again. He knew the council would scheme. But for the first time, he did not feel helpless. The fire was his, and it was growing. Yet even as Kalen dreamed of what might come, the sky above Drakkar Prime darkened. Across the heavens, sensors screamed. A warship had entered orbit, vast, bristling with weapons, its hull marked not with the crest of the Dragonborn, but with the sigil of a rival empire. The timing was no accident. They had come because they believed the dynasty weak, because they believed the crippled prince could not protect his throne. From the high towers, nobles and generals rushed to the battlements. Kalen stood with Ilara at his side, staring at the vast shadow that blotted out the stars. The whispers that had once mocked him now carried a new weight. For the crippled prince had breathed fire at last, and now the galaxy itself had come to see if he could wield it. The rival warship hung above Drakkar Prime like a dark omen, its hull blotting out starlight, its weapons humming with silent promise. In the halls of the Dragonborn Council, voices rose in fury and fear. Some demanded retaliation, others whispered that the Empire should not provoke open war. But through the shouting, one decision cut through like a blade. The crippled prince would be sent to meet the threat. It was spoken as duty, but Kalen knew the truth. They did not want him to succeed. They wanted him destroyed. If he perished in battle, the dynasty would be rid of its shame, and the whispers of his awakening fire would be silenced. The rival empire would strike, Kalen would fall, and the council would breathe easier. It was execution, dressed as honor. When the order was delivered, Kalen felt the weight settle heavy on his shoulders. His wings ached, his breath shook, but he did not bow. Ilara was with him, her jaw clenched, her eyes burning with a fire no less fierce than his. That night, when the torches dimmed and the palace walls grew cold, she spoke words that carved themselves into him. "If you fight like them, you will lose. But if you fight like us, like humans, you will survive." Kalen frowned. "What do you mean?" Ilara stepped closer, her voice low, steady. "Dragons believe strength alone wins wars. But humans? We learned long ago that survival comes from something greater. We plan, we deceive, we adapt. We turn the enemy's pride against them. You don't need to be the strongest on the field, you only need to make them believe you are." Her words were dangerous, even treasonous, But Kalen listened. For the first time, he saw a path that did not end with his death. A path carved not by fire alone, but by cunning. He agreed. And so, in the shadows of the palace, the maid became a general and the prince her soldier. She taught him the art of misdirection, of feints and traps. She showed him how humans fought in ruins and trenches, how they used terrain, timing, and willpower to topple foes far stronger than themselves. Where his tutors had told him to strike hard and fast, Elara told him to strike smart. Days later, the crippled prince boarded a warship bound for the contested system. Soldiers greeted him with mockery veiled as respect, their eyes glinting with cruel amusement. They believed they were marching to watch him fail. Kalen said nothing, but Elara's presence at his side was a silent blade. He remembered her words, every lesson burned into his mind. The battle came swift. The rival empire had deployed a fleet twice the size of Kalen's, confident they would crush the Dragonborn quickly. When the first volleys lit the void, Kalen's commanders urged him to order a full assault, to hurl their ships into the fire and prove their worth. But Kalen shook his head. He had studied their formation. He had seen the trap waiting to snap shut. He issued a different command, one that made the generals scoff. Pull back. Let them chase. Confusion rippled through the fleet, but the order stood. The rival ships surged forward, emboldened, certain of their victory. They spread too wide, their wings of steel overextended, eager to encircle their prey. That was when Kalen struck. At his signal, hidden batteries ignited from the shadow of an asteroid field, catching the enemy in crossfire. The crippled prince had lured them into the jaws of their own pride. Explosions tore across the void, flames blooming like stars. The soldiers of the Dragonborn stared in disbelief. The boy they had mocked had outmaneuvered their enemy with precision no warlord of fire had ever shown. Elara watched from the command deck, her heart hammering with pride. For the first time, the human way of war had echoed across a battlefield ruled by dragons. But the battle was not over. The rival flagship surged forward, massive cannons unleashing torrents of plasma. Kalen's ship shuddered, alarms screaming. He gripped the railing, his crippled wings aching with every tremor. He could feel fear clawing at his chest, but beneath it, the ember burned brighter. He remembered the duel in the arena, the fire that had answered him when he refused to fall. He closed his eyes, letting that memory ignite. When the flagship drew closer, Kalen ordered his ship straight toward it. Generals shouted in protest, soldiers cried madness, but the prince's voice cut through. Forward! The two ships collided in a storm of fire, hull against hull, weapons blazing. And in that moment of collision, Kalen stepped onto the battlefield himself. He descended with a strike force of warriors, but it was his fire that led the charge. The crippled prince who had once been mocked now breathed flame that scorched through enemy ranks. His body ached, his strength faltered, but his will did not break. Elara fought at his side, blade in hand, her shouts guiding him through the chaos. Together, they carved a path to the heart of the enemy ship. And when the rival commander fell before them, the battlefield fell silent. The impossible had happened. Against all expectation, the crippled prince had won. The Dragonborn fleet erupted with roars, their disbelief turning to awe. For the first time, Kalen's name was not whispered with mockery, but with fear and respect. Yet victory carried its own price. As Kalen stood amid the wreckage, blood dripping from his hands, Elara's gaze caught something else. High above, on the horizon of stars, new signals flickered. More ships. Not of the rival empire, but of others, watching, waiting. Word had spread faster than fire. The galaxy had seen the crippled prince rise, and now every power hungered to test him. Elara's voice was quiet, filled with dread. They will not stop now. You've shown them you can fight. And that means they will come, all of them, to see if you can survive. Kalen stared at the burning wreckage of the flagship, the ember in his chest blazing brighter than ever. He had won a battle, but he could feel the storm gathering. The human way of war had given him victory once, but would it be enough when the entire galaxy turned its eyes upon him? The stars had barely cooled from the battle when the palace of Drakkar Prime erupted in celebration. Fireworks tore across the skies, dragons roared from their towers, and the people shouted the name of the prince they had once mocked. The crippled heir had brought down a rival empire's fleet, and for the first time in memory, Kaelin's name was sung not with pity, but with pride. Yet within the golden halls of the court, pride walked hand in hand with suspicion. The counselors met in secret, their eyes hard as stone. They had watched the battle unfold, had seen strategy where there should have been none, cunning where there should have been only brute force. They whispered of the human Maid always at Kaelin's side, the one who guided him in ways dragons never had. He breathes fire, yes, one counselor hissed. But whose mind shaped his war? The answer hung heavy in the air. It was not the blood of the dragonborn. It was the hand of a human. And that, to the proud lords of fire, was unforgivable. Kaelin did not hear these whispers. He was blind to them, consumed instead by the strange mixture of triumph and fear burning inside him. Victory had awakened something powerful, but it also carried a question that haunted him. Each time he closed his eyes, he remembered the way Elara had stood beside him, whispering commands, guiding his every move. He remembered the words she had spoken, "Fight like us, fight like humans." Why had she known so much of war? Why had she fought like no servant should? It was a night heavy with silence when Kaelin finally asked. They stood alone in his chambers, the golden firelight painting their faces. His voice was quiet, almost trembling. "Who are you, Elara? Truly?" For a long moment, she did not answer. Her hands tightened around the cloth she held, her eyes refusing to meet his. Then, with a breath heavy with resignation, she spoke. "I was not born to serve dragons. I was made to fight them." The words struck like a blade. Elara lifted her gaze, steady now, though sorrow burned deep within it. She told him of Earth, a world far from the core stars, a world that had once been small and weak but had learned to fight in shadows. She told him of a secret project, soldiers bred not with wings of fire, but with minds and bodies sharpened by survival. She was one of them, trained, altered, and sent to infiltrate the great empires of the galaxy. Her mission had been clear: find the cracks in the Dragonborn dynasty, and pry them open. Kaelin staggered back as the truth settled over him like ice. The maid who had saved him, who had guided him, who had made him believe in himself. She had been a weapon all along. His voice shook. "You used me." Elara's face broke with pain, her voice fierce. "At first, yes. I was sent to find weakness. But then I saw you. I saw the boy everyone mocked, the prince they had abandoned. And I chose. I chose you, Kaelin. Not Earth. Not the mission. You. But trust, once cracked, does not heal so easily." Kaelin turned from her, his heart warring with itself. He wanted to believe her, to cling to the bond that had carried him this far. Yet doubt gnawed at him. Was every word she had spoken just another lie? Had his victories been his, or hers? The council did not give him time to decide. That very night, guards stormed the chambers, their armor gleaming, their voices cold. They seized Elara, chains binding her wrists, and dragged her through the halls. Kaelin fought to stop them, but the counselors stood before him, their decree iron. "She is a spy, a traitor, an enemy of the Empire. She will be tried and executed." Kaelin's fire roared in protest, his veins burning with fury, but his father's voice cut deeper than flame. The Emperor's eyes were heavy, ancient, unyielding. "You are heir to the Dragonborn. You cannot fall for the lies of prey. If she has deceived you, let her die, and prove you are not weak." The words tore through Kaelin's chest. He watched as Elara was dragged away, her eyes never leaving his. She did not cry, did not beg. She only whispered, soft enough that only he could hear, "Believe me, even if no one else will." For the first time since his fire had awakened, Kaelin felt powerless again. The council had taken her, the court had judged her, and the galaxy would watch her burn. He stood in his chambers long after she was gone, the silence heavier than any chain. Rage simmered within him, clashing with doubt, with fear, with something he could not name. But outside the palace walls, the galaxy was shifting. Rival empires watched the crippled prince rise, and now they saw weakness they could exploit. The Dragonborn celebrated victory, but enemies prepared for war. And in the center of it all, Kalen faced the cruelest choice of his life: accept the death of the one who had saved him, or defy the empire itself. The decree was clear. In 3 days' time, the human maid would be executed before the court, her ashes scattered to prove the purity of the Dragonborn line. The crippled prince had risen, but without her, would he fall again? The 3 days passed like the slow turning of a blade pressed against the throat. Across Drakkar Prime, whispers spread of the human maid who had dared deceive the empire. Some called her a witch, others a spy, and many demanded her death as proof that the Dragonborn line could not be stained by the touch of prey. The council fed these whispers, turning them into roars, until the city itself trembled with anticipation of her execution. Kalen heard those roars each night, echoing through the stone walls of his chamber. He saw the torches burning outside, smelled the fire of his people waiting for blood. Yet none of it mattered compared to the image burned into his mind. The chains around Alara's wrists, her steady gaze, her final whisper. Believe me, even if no one else will. He had tried to bury it, to convince himself that loyalty to the empire must come before all else. But no matter how he tried, his heart would not betray her. On the dawn of the 3rd day, he stood before the mirror of black obsidian, staring at the reflection of a prince who was no longer a boy. His crippled legs trembled as they always had, yet the fire within him pulsed stronger than ever, burning through his veins as though demanding release. He tightened his fists, and the room itself seemed to quiver. For the first time in his life, Kalen did not feel broken. He felt dangerous. The execution square was filled with thousands. The sky was darkened by dragons circling above, their wings casting shadows across the city. At the center stood Alara, chained to a stone pillar, her head lifted high. She did not beg, did not plead. Her silence spoke louder than any words could. The counselors raised their voices, declaring her guilt, calling her a traitor, demanding fire to cleanse her. The emperor himself rose from his throne, his eyes as sharp as blades. By the law of our kind, he thundered, this human shall burn, and my son shall light the flame, to prove his loyalty to the Dragonborn. The crowd roared. All eyes turned to Kalen. His chest tightened as he stepped forward, each movement slow, heavy with dread. A torch was placed in his hand, the fire flickering as though mocking him. He walked toward Alara, and for a heartbeat, the world went silent. She met his eyes. There was no fear, only trust. Something shattered inside him. Kalen dropped the torch. It clattered to the stone, the flames sputtering out. A gasp rippled through the square. Then Kalen's voice rang out, stronger than it had ever been. No, I will not burn her. I will not burn the one who gave me strength when none of you would. I will not kill the only person who believed I was more than a cripple. The council erupted in fury. The emperor's face turned to stone, his voice cold with rage. Then you are no son of mine. But Kalen did not flinch. The fire within him erupted, no longer a flicker but a storm. Flames tore from his body, golden and white, brighter than the sun itself. The chains around Alara melted into nothing, the stone beneath his feet cracked, and the dragons above screamed as they felt a power they had never known. The crowd fell silent, blinded by the light of a fire not seen in 1,000 years, the flame of the firstborn, the original dragons who had shaped empires. Kalen stood in the heart of the blaze, his crippled legs straightening, his body remade in fire. He reached for Alara, pulling her free, and when their hands touched, the fire did not burn her. It wrapped around her instead, as if recognizing her as part of him. Together they stood, a dragon prince and a human soldier, united in defiance. The council shrieked for guards, for blades, for chains, but none dared approach. The fire around Kalen roared too fiercely, and the dragons in the sky began to circle lower. Not in anger, but in awe. They bowed their massive heads, one by one, as if yielding to a power greater than bloodlines and council decrees. Kalen's voice thundered through the silence. You call her a traitor. But without her, we would have fallen. Without her, I would still be crawling in the dark. She is not prey. She is not weak. She is the reason your empire still breathes. If you want her dead, then you will have to kill me first." The emperor rose, his flames swirling, but even he hesitated. For the first time, his power looked small beside the storm blazing in his sun. Around the square, people who had come to see a human burn instead began to kneel, bowing not to the emperor, not to the council, but to the crippled prince who now burned with unchained fire. That night marked the breaking of an empire and the birth of something new. Kalen did not take the throne by force. He claimed it by fire, by defiance, by showing his people that strength was not in blood alone, but in choice. And when he stood beside Alara, he did not see a maid, nor a spy, but an equal, a partner, a spark that had turned his ashes into flame. But beyond the horizon, other empires watched with dread. They had seen the crippled dragon prince rise, had seen the forbidden fire awaken, and had seen a human stand unburned beside him. To them, it was not victory. It was warning. For if dragons and humans could stand together, what power in the galaxy could stop them? And in the silence of space, unseen by any, messages raced across the stars. Messages of fear, of alliances forming, of enemies preparing. The galaxy had just witnessed a miracle. But miracles, in the cold void of war, always came with a price.